Now let's talk about Ruskin a little bit. Now, Proust interpreted Ruskin's books into French, and one of the things that had a profound influence on him was the sense of finding spirituality through art. Because Proust didn't have a particular, he wasn't religious, but he did find tremendous spirituality through, again, he was fascinated with Ruskin's use of, descriptions of churches and the architecture of churches.
Right.
And again, I think that was a vehicle, that Proust was able to use and use art in that sort of spiritual way. And one of the interesting things, and then when I think on the same topic, when we go to Swann, and how Swann was able to place Jethro's daughter Zipporah. He talks about for Odette. He talks about that painting by is it Botticelli? I believe it's Botticelli that did this painting of Zipporah, and he saw because Odette wasn't necessarily his type, but he was able to fix himself in art and make a connection to art, that he could place this person within his framework, and that was able to. And then we have Van Toy's Sonata, which again, with the magical phrase that he connected.
Right.
He was able to make these connections again with Odette, and he could build the relationship that lived in his heart. It was somehow separate from the person, and they amalgamated with the person, and it was just a really. I'm sure Proust was able to see the world the same way.
On the days when I did not go down to Madame de Guermantes, to pass the time somehow during the hour that preceded the return of my mistress, I would take up an album of Elstier's work, one of Bergotte's books, Vinteuil's Sonata. Then, just as those works of art which seem to address themselves to the eye or ear alone require that, if we are to enjoy them, our awakened intelligence shall collaborate closely with those organs, I would unconsciously evoke from myself the dreams that Albertine had inspired in me long ago, before I knew her, dreams that had been stifled by the routine of everyday life. I cast them into the composer's phrase or the painter's image, as into a crucible, or used them to enrich the book that I was reading. And no doubt the book appeared all the more vivid in consequence.
Proust, like many intelligent people, he was able to do two tasks at once. So while he was writing the novel, he took time out, or at the same time translated Sésame et les Lys of Ruskin's into French, and he reworked practically every word, and as not to lose the ephemeral meaning of the English text. And you can imagine that was a huge work to do, but that's the type that he probably enjoyed doing.
Well, he was thought of as a dandy and as an amateur in society. That's what the things that he was a very busy guy.
In this same vein, somebody asked Celeste Albaret, Proust's longtime housekeeper, how did the little Marcel become such a genius? And her answer was, the little Marcel always knew that he will become the great Proust. I love that because it's so absolutely pithy. But he was also doing research. He was so interested in so many things, like what did women wear and the different fabrics and the colors and.
But that's on one level. On the other level, it's political history, military history, social history, art history.
Yes. Yeah.
It was.
The Dreyfus affair,
the
for
Dreyfus
instance,
affair, which is a
was-
major
yes,
part of this.
it was really a major subject at that time. And of course, Proust was a Dreyfusard himself. But
although in the novel he stood totally. He seemed to have no opinion one way or the other, and he gave all the opinions to Bloch, to Swann, to the Gamant. So he was able to use all these. He was able to stay neutral in many things in the book, and use the other characters to spout forward his positions.
That's a very interesting insight. I didn't catch it, and I'm sure that was not naming himself. Even just a narrator would be mentioned, that he left a lot up to people's imagination.
He left a lot. He didn't venture a lot of opinions. He used his surrogates to do that. But it was interesting, and I think he even tried to express that towards the end of the book, where remember at the party at the end, and Bloch is there, and he's there, and they couldn't remember who said what and who wrote what, and it's as if they had remembered one person as the other person, and I think that was an intentional.
And the masks that they were wearing, and mal de tête, they called it.
When I came to your house and we talked to your husband Fred afterwards, we started talking about Denver, where I grew up, where he grew up, and he was talking about a world that my parents lived in, and being able to make it come vividly alive and remember the names of the streets in Denver were named after flowers and presidents, and again, this is. I wouldn't think of this so much without the Proustian experience of the sense that all of our lives are important, and the fact that the more of our life that we have access to, and instead of just living in the current or the contemporary, the more that we have our whole life having access to it, is really mentally healthy and enriching and interesting in a sense that without this book, a lot of things that seem insignificant we would let otherwise go by. I mean, that was a very Proustian experience, just then going back into this other place in time and history to bring those memories back. And it seems like very much the kind of parallel experience.
And especially when you take the fact that he was, 51, 52 when he died, and usually people at that age don't have these terrific memory recalls, and I don't know, voluntary and involuntary memories. That comes later. So I wonder, to his credit, how he lived so much in 51 years.
I don't know that he did live so much but he was able to live it twice, and go back and take what was seemingly random and meaningless, that we all, in the day-to-day, in the mundane, it's very hard to tell what has meaning, and go back on the second time and see what the patterns are and make the connections. And I know that you came to Oakland after you left Hungary, and I wonder if there was a time in Oakland where that whole world that you'd left behind seemed to have disappeared, as if Oakland was your reality, and when did you start going back and then reliving your other life?
First of all, in my other life, I was a translator and an interpreter for the military government in Bavaria. So I lived in Bavaria for 5 years. And so that was a big change already from my life in Hungary. So what I feel now that you mention it, and I never really thought about it in detail, that it was almost like, first came New York when I came overseas, and it was almost like stepping up on a staircase. And to me, California, especially in the early 50s, was heaven. I mean, then we discovered Carmel, and that was paradise.
When you got here, did you give much thought to the earlier times, or did that stop being a reality to you in a sense?
It stopped being, and it was stopped a little bit artificially, because my country was ripped away by occupation and by communism. And I think that that was good and bad at the same time. It was good because I didn't dwell on, oh, I would love to be back, and I didn't have that feeling. But frankly, I did miss Europe for quite a while, even the wartime, not the wartime itself. First of all, my family were landowners. Practically everybody was owning land, and it seemed like not only they themselves, but their offsprings and the later generation will be always very secure and very safe. And then it only took going across a frontier during the war, but then we were so happy that we were still alive. And we had a few experiences that were sort of life-changing, and change is good. I think change is fine. Even the changes that seem pretty bad for some people, it depends on how you look at it yourself.
Any last thoughts summing up?
No, I was just again thinking back at that beautiful horse that was photographed and in the Carmel magazine. And I spent a lot of my time in Hungary with riding horses, and it was part of our life. But can you imagine nowadays, I think in another few decades, they will disappear, and we'll see them in maybe in circus, maybe in zoos, and those magnificent animals. Of course, we have magnificent cars, but I would say a beautiful horse is much more beautiful than a beautiful car.